Hi. I think we're just about to start live streaming on YouTube as well. But if I could welcome everybody to this BAFTA Masterclass on composition with the wonderful Hildur Gudnadóttir, who is, I think probably out of everybody working now, I would say one of the biggest inspirations to me, and I know to lots and lots of other people, which is an embarrassing introduction, of course, but I think makes a lot of sense. Now, we're going to do, I'll just explain a little bit of the housekeeping today. We've got 75 minutes together, and so we're going to have 55 minutes of conversation and with Hildur explaining some of her wonderful processes, and we can talk about Joker and talk about Chernobyl and your previous work as well. But then also we'll have 20 minutes for questions from the Q&A panel. So if you're on the Zoom chat, then down at the bottom, there is a Q&A window. If you would like to enter some questions in there, we'll see what we can make of them in the last 20 minutes at the end. But just for anybody who's not familiar with Hildur's work, she's probably, I think, got one of the most bulging awards cabinets of anybody over the last year or two from the extraordinary reaction to some of the film and TV work that she's done, Joker and Chernobyl. But I think for many people who knew her work before, then one of the fascinating things is, for me certainly, is about her development as an artist, and her earlier work and her recordings, and then how that has become parlayed and seen in some of the programs that we see. So that's a long-winded introduction, but hello, Hildur.
Hello, Michael. Thank you for this lovely introduction. I'm very excited.
It's the most sort of kind of mortifying thing to have to sit through somebody kind of going, and they went to school here, and then when they were 17, they did a good bicycle challenge. How we're going to structure hopefully this masterclass today, and obviously, you know, there's so much interest in you talking about your techniques, is we've got a couple of specific clips that have either been sent out in invitations to attendees or will be re-upped on the chat windows as well. One from the bathroom scene from Joker, and then an amazing scene from episode 2 on Chernobyl. But I'd really like to before we kind of dig into the weeds, I'd love to hear more about really your how things started, because I know your family was a very musical family as well. So it feels like you've been kind of swimming in music in a way right from the very start.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, pretty much everyone in my family are musicians. It's either like music or health. So people are either, you know, musicians, composers, or doctors, or nurses, or physiotherapists. So it's like I choose music rather than health.
But if somebody had a small accident, you could still help out, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. No, I know little tricks.
Exactly.
But yes, exactly. Music is a healer. I guess it's it's sort of well, music has always been the kind of the best parameter of my mental health, I guess, and well, actually, and also physical health. I think you need to be. I think it's important to be connected to your body and connected to your joints specifically, like when you're making music. And I think that's a part of my process that's very important, and that I think is not really talked about enough. That's the kind of the how you need to nurture yourself to nurture the music, and your body is such a big part of that. Even if you're just sitting there, I guess especially if you're sitting in front of your computer the whole day, it's like I find the way to access ideas and to access the thought process like happens very much like in the body. You know, it happens in the joints, and the more fluid your joints are, the more fluid your thoughts are, the more fluid creativity is flowing, you know. So I think there's definitely a connection between the two.
I think that's fascinating, and obviously as a cellist yourself, which is a sort of a kind of I've always felt a whole body instrument in a way that
really is. Yeah.
Some instruments are very sort of small and tight, or very but the
to
resonance.
Exactly, yeah. No, to be able to play the cello, you need to you need to really use your body, and you need to be connected to your body, because it is an instrument that you're using your whole body to play. You know, you feel it very much like within your, like it resonates in your chest, it resonates in your lungs. So your breathing is very connected to it as well, and your joints need to be, you know, fluid. But I think that also it goes for every instrument, and I'm of course like someone who's always sung a lot as well, and the body is of course like very connected to the voice, and you know but I think it goes for every instrument, and I think it goes for composition and the thought process as well. Like this is something that I've been thinking about a lot. That the kind of more blocked you are within your body, I think the more blocked your thought process is going to be. And as a composer, you know, I think that's a physical process as well, because you need to be able to visualize what it is that you want to do. You need to be able to think up that, you know, it's like building a house. You need to visualize the house before you just start putting bricks together. Like you need to kind of see the house and to be able to access your thoughts and to hear your thoughts. I think that the body is an important part of that. And I've just you know, I've had a lot of my friends, you know, composer friends, musician friends who I've seen who have not been like aware enough about this, and who have basically gotten like half paralyzed from just, you know.
I'm sitting down as we speak.
Yeah, exactly. Sitting in front of the computer, or sitting at the instrument, because I think it's like, you know, it's I think it's one of the most important things about keeping your creativity alive, and keeping your curiosity alive, and keeping kind of just like your thoughts flowing, is to be able to keep your body flowing, and keeping like just like like an active process basically. And I think the body is a part of that, because I think the mind also, it lives in the whole. It's not just here, like it lives in the whole system, I think. So that's
And so do you think that this sort of this approach, which sounds very instinctive as well, it sounds sort of not to say it's not cerebral, but you know that there is some physicality to it. Was this did it kind of develop through your teen years? Was this always how you approached music? Because I mean, you did study sort of classically, in inverted commas, whatever that means, but do you think that as your path diverged from the more sort of traditional classical training, were some of these ideas that you wanted to express?
Yeah, I think it's something that's always been important to me, but maybe more unconsciously than consciously. I think it's like we had a little chat before this before our chat became public. we were talking a little bit about you know, how this time of how this COVID time is, you know, it's kind of allowed us all a bit of space to kind of re-evaluate what's important to us, and what I guess also just to kind of re-evaluate the process, like what's important about the process, and these thoughts that I mentioned about fluidity are something that I've especially been thinking a lot about in the last few months, because, you know, when you're not even allowed to leave your house, and you're not allowed to kind of access the fluidity that you would normally have with interacting with people, and with just, you know, going out for a walk, or seeing friends or something, it's something that you start to miss, and then you realize like, hey, wait a minute, what is it about this movement that's not happening at the moment in these circumstances where I'm basically just forced to be at home. And then you start to pinpoint like, oh wow, okay, it's this and it's that. And I think that's, the thoughts and ideas about fluidity is something that's I've been thinking about a lot the last years, I guess, or maybe kind of formulating, or like how would you explain that, or just like forming into something that you can express with words, because that's something I had to do a lot in the last years. Like all of a sudden I have to do a lot of talking, which I didn't normally have to do before. But it's something that's, I think, always been really important to me, and as someone from Iceland, where I grew up in the Icelandic music scene, where it's when I started making music with my friends in my teens, it was all about like dialogue and collaboration, and we would just basically make music together because there basically wasn't anything else to do. So
it's very dark,
Yeah, exactly. Very dark, and no internet, and no way of getting out of the country, or anything, nothing else to do basically. So we all started making music together, like bands like Moom or Sigurós, or these contemporaries, Icelandic contemporaries that were we start making music as a conversation, and that is when you're having a dialogue with someone, well, at least that you like, if you're having a dialogue that you enjoy and engage with, there is a lot of fluidity in that, and there's a lot of movement in that, and that's something that's the way that I always enjoyed creating the most, where there is dialogue and there's movement and there's ideas are just flowing, and as opposed to when you're trying to create something and you're really stuck and you're trying to kind of force something out of
yes,
you're sitting by yourself in a room and you're just like, I want to make this. It's like nothing. I mean, we've all been there. We've all had to make music under those circumstances, but it's a lot less fun. It's a lot less creative. It's more like kind of banging your head against the wall. But I think this is a part of my process that's always been very present in my music making and in my history. But it's something that I just kind of started to realize in the later years, like how important it is to me, and that it's actually the way that the more you enjoy the process, and the more kind of fluid you can keep it, and the more kind of enjoyable and alive you can keep the process, the more fun it is, and the more fun you have, the more it resonates with you, and then the more it resonates with you, it seemingly resonates with other people as well, and you have a chance to kind of create like a bit bigger resonance, which is ultimately, I think, what you're trying to do when you make music. You're trying to basically you're having I see the whole process basically as both as just making music and working on films and collaborating. I mean, it's whether you're having a dialogue with yourself in a room or director or whomever you're talking to. It's all a dialogue. There's probably this one.
That's dialogue.
It's dialogue. And I think it's the more fun you have in that dialogue and in the conversation, the kind of it's not so much about having like a wider audience, like that's never really been important to me, but to feel that what you're making is like it's moving people, like it's speaking to people, and you're able to have a resonant dialogue with people that you'll never even meet. It's such a beautiful thing about music. It's like sending you know, having a dialogue with yourself or whomever, and then you put a message in a bottle and throw it out, and then someone's gonna hear it or you know, resonate with it, and it's gonna speak to them, and that's like, you know, it's such a beautiful process.
You know, I think that's absolutely fascinating because, you know, we're going to look at a couple of the specific projects in a moment, but I think what, for me anyways, is incredibly illuminating is to hear you describe that process of flow and communication and collaboration, because it feels like you've managed to bring that, and maybe you'll be able to tell us, bring that intact into these films or TV shows that have reached a very wide audience. But I think certainly from the outside, if people first got to know your work through, say, Joker, which was obviously, you know, sort of a global success, then I think imagining that you had sort of set your sights on writing Joker and just studied, and that I think is to sort of misinterpret and not to understand you as an artist and you as a person. And maybe we can move on to Joker now, because I think we've probably all read some of the backstory of how you were writing before, and how your process wasn't necessarily just a traditional, here's the film, you've got 4 weeks, off you go, the orchestra's, you know, waiting for you a week on Friday. Had you worked with Todd, the director, before? What was your entry point into the film?
Yeah, no, I'd never worked with him before. He sent me an email and said that he really loved my music and asked me if I was interested.
Did it? It could have gone in your spam folder, and then it would have all been very different.
Exactly. No, yeah, and to be honest, I was like, you know, initially I was like, well, I don't really, you know, because I just, you know, remembered seeing the Batman films, and I was like, well, am I the right person to be making a superhero film? Like, I'm not really sure. so I, like, initially when we spoke, I was kind of like, you know, just told him, like, straight out, like, if you wanted to make an action movie, I'm not sure I'm the right person for it. Because I'm not really, you know, I'm not really super interested in that, in the kind of, well, I mean, it's prejudice as well of me, but I'm not really somewhat interested in the fast-paced, like, fast delivery, fast, like, thinking, you know, it's kind of, I'm a pretty slow person, so I like to take time to be able to dive into things and be, like, you know, go into the details, and so my initial kind of reaction was just like, oh, are you sure? And then he said, he was just like, no, read the script and then you'll understand. And so he sent me the script and I read it and I just loved it. I just completely fell in love with the story that he was portraying, and the kind of the character study that he was doing with his character, because it's such an interesting aspect as well, because it's like it has this kind of whole history about it, like this. So I'm just going to close the door because my son didn't close the door.
Bring him in. More the merrier.
He's playing chess out there. I can hear him talking about that. But yeah. So I was really intrigued by this, by the history of the character and how much this character means to such a wide audience. Like it's people, like, I don't remember any, like, villain in cinema history that or even, like, beyond cinema, just like literature history, as well, comic history, like, you know, a character that people feel so strongly about, and that people feel so strongly about both him as a character and also portrayals of his character that we've had, you know, that people just seem to like, you know, feel so strongly about. And it's really interesting to take a character like that that's so deeply rooted for people, you know, it means a lot to so many people, and kind of give a bit of a different take on, you know, just like if you imagine, like, you know, what if this was his story, like what if he's not like, you know, the person that we thought he was, right? You know, he didn't come from the place that we thought he'd come from, or you know, where did he even come from? Where is that, like, you know, reality? And it's so interesting with characters like that have had, you know, they've lived their own lives, like real lives, yeah, with how they've resonated with people, and I find that really interesting, and I just found it really such a fascinating process to be a part of, and a fascinating way of storytelling, because it's you know, when you read the book and you've invested so many hours with the characters that you're reading about, and you start to like really feel for them, and you start to really kind of, you know the characters, and kind of yeah, just resonate with them, and then, you know, when you finish the book, you're just sad to have to leave those people behind, you know. And I guess I hope we've all had this feeling, because that's the magic of literature, and then we have this through cinema and comics, or, you know, so you have this combination of you know, this huge outreach of both literature and cinema, and it's just like it's like a really strong feeling that people have for him. So I thought it was yeah, fascinating.
And if we look at perhaps specifically the bathroom scene, which is at a pivotal moment in the film when Joker has really just sort of kind of exploded. It's like the initiating action where he's shot, for anybody who hasn't seen it, spoiler alert, when he's shot, kind of, you know, the violence inside him is broken out, and he shot the guys on the train, and then he runs through the streets and then comes into the scene, as everybody will have seen the clip. Now, in terms of your actual sort of composition process for this, was that a pre-existing piece that you'd written at the script stage that then Todd played and tracked in? And if it was, did you change it again at the end? Did you re-record? How would you say you got from no music to there being music in that scene?
Yeah, no, I mean, that was really this scene is really one of the most kind of, well, it's really one of the most magical moments of collaboration that I've had, this scene specifically, because so Todd sent me the script and asked me to read it and just to see if I even liked it, and I really, like I said, I really loved it. And then he asked me to start writing music just based on my feelings of the script, and you know, just kind of what he basically wanted to hear what I felt from reading the script, and he didn't really give me any sort of instructions, or he didn't really, you know, he wasn't very specific about anything, but like to want to go into his head. And I think it was also clear from the script was that we really needed to follow him, like we needed to be inside him to kind of feel what he was feeling. And so I wrote a bunch of music, and he loved it. You know, he just really, it really resonated with him what I had written. So it was one of these just really magical moments of just complete kind of understanding of each other's like experiences, and it was just so great to be able to have that dialogue without any words, you know, be able to just I mean, apart from the words that were in the script, but we didn't, you know, no real need for like explanations or anything like that. And then he took this music that I'd written and played it on set. So he basically, like in the bathroom dance scene, Joaquin is responding to this actual music that we hear in the scene, and it's pretty much, it's like pretty much identical to what I wrote in the first place, but like I re-recorded the orchestra parts and added some vocals afterward. But so basically Joaquin was able to really respond in real time to the music, and the music was able to lead him through the transformation, and then the the cinematographer was able to just follow Joaquin's lead. So basically it's like this big kind of dance together where Joaquin could just like be led by the music, and everyone on set basically was just like going with Joaquin, and this incredible scene that came out of it. And then when they sent it to me, I was because this was one of the kind of first scenes that they shot, and it was the first scene they sent to me from the set, like from the dailies, and it was just so magical to see that Joaquin was basically embodying what I had felt like from reading the script. And it was just like, so, because I had somehow felt these movements like really similarly, but they're not scripted like this. Like in this scene in particular, it's just like he's supposed to throw away the, or like hide the gun and say like, oh shit, or something like that, it's like there's nothing
there
like
was no dancing. No dancing.
So it would be so unbelievable to see, like, wow, that's exactly what I felt. And we never talked about it. Like, we never had a conversation about it. And it was just so wonderful for everyone to have the space to be able to communicate through their mediums how they feel about the story, and that I think takes real trust on behalf of the director to even just like allow anyone the space to be able to do this, because like you said before, like often, in the film world, you have like very little time and there's very tight deadlines. It's very stressful. There's a lot of elements that are really working against you as a creative person.
Very much so.
So it's a huge luxury to be able to have the space to do something like this, and it's a really bold move and a very trusting move on behalf of a director to allow people the space to do this.
Definitely. I know there's a lot of composers on the on this chat, so if I might dive into the technical weeds with you just for a moment or two, because it feels like a lot of composers at the moment will be using a computer to write, and so they will probably be mocking things up with samples, which are sort of kind of virtual instruments, and then that will exist as a sort of a representation of the cue for a long time, and then right at the end we'll go and record with the orchestra. But it feels very much, particularly because you're playing so much, that you're more creating with audio. Do you start just by recording yourself or some found sounds? What's your blank piece of paper look like on a Monday morning?
Yeah, well, I try. I have just like, I have really had to come to terms with not being a fan of the computer. It took me quite a long time of trying to be a fan of the computer to realizing like, it's just not really my medium. And I think that's, and that's just, well, I mean, I think as a musician today, whether it's a composer or a performer, like I think it's like there's a lot of because everything is becoming very accessible and very like easy. You're expected to be able to do everything yourself. Basically, you're expected to be able to play everything, record everything, like MIDI, arrange everything, and etc. And like it's a really there's a lot of steps to there's really like a lot of steps to learn today, and you know, interfaces keep changing, you know, programs keep changing, like the, you know, and now you're also supposed to be like a social media mogul and interacting with everyone and their grandmother on social media. Accessible all day.
I interact with my grandmother for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So
not around still, sadly. My mum certainly.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, people have kids and what have you, we have to cook lunch and all of this. So it's kind of, and I spent a lot of time trying to wear all of these hats, and I, you know, I do love a lot of these hats. Like I love recording, and I love, like, you know, I love working on a computer, you know, for certain things, certain processes that I like. And but I had to kind of, especially in the last years, I gave myself the space to kind of evaluate my creative process, and just kind of allow myself the space to not compose on a keyboard with an orchestra sample bank, because I just don't find that inspiring, and I don't find click tracks inspiring, and I you know, I love to
That's the sound of people cheering, by the way.
yeah, right?
It's the sound of 1,000 people going, I wish, come on. Just check it all out the window.
But yeah, no, it's and I think, you know, I don't necessarily have to, I don't have to play everything myself, but I realize that fluidity is a huge part of my process, and listening is a huge part of my process that I really love. And I think it's really important for everyone to just kind of in the beginning, just like realize what it is that gets them into like a fluid state, like a state of fluid creativity, and accept that might not be like, you know, the keyboard and your sample banks, you know, and that's totally okay. You know, it's like it's like totally okay.
It's not the law. It's not the law that you have to use samples.
No, exactly. And I think there's so many interfaces as well that are now available that allow you to access your sample banks that are not the keyboard, for example, and those
interesting. Yeah,
exactly. And that's something that I really enjoy as well, like, you know, interfaces that are just a bit more fluid, you know, that allow for you know, tuning also not to be
I was going to say about tuning, and this is me being totally geeky, is that there's the sense of intonation. So, for instance, I think the bathroom scene is a perfect example. That the tuning of those initial cello notes, which are played, you know, very much without vibrato, almost like a viol. You know, they have a sort of almost medieval timbre. But then because, I mean, it where the fourth sits and where the fifth sits, and the sort of like the way those chords are voiced, they wouldn't sound the same if you just played them on a cello sample that was all tuned perfectly to 440. It's missing a whole human connection.
That's exactly it, because like I think for me, like I'm just so like I really like love the microscopic details. Like I really just like, and that's where my heart beats the strongest. Like that's where my real passion lies, is just like being able to just like look through a microscope to those tiny little details, like the vibrato and like the intonation. I think like intonation, like there's so much that you can express with intonation that's not just like absolute, you know,
equal tempered, straight down on the grid, so to speak.
You know, piano tuning, and that's and that's really where I think like a lot of the feelings lie that we are so kind of starving for today. Like, because today, I mean, it's all about like, you know, pop music today, it's all completely sterilized, and it's all completely auto-tuned, and to be able to just like hear hear these like tiny movements, like the tiny movements of just like, you know, notes just like stretching themselves like within the intonation, or just like slightly moving, and there's so much expression within those microscopic details that you can't get like on a, you know, played counterpoint on a keyboard, and that's why I just like I've kind of just stepped away from that entirely, and I stopped fooling myself that I find that inspiring.
Don't beat yourself up. It's fine. There's plenty of other people doing that. Don't need anybody else doing it.
Such a relief when I allowed myself the space to do it. And I was like, wait a minute, like why do I want to, you know, I don't need to.
Permission not to do terrible mock-ups all day and sit in front of a computer.
There's people that do that so well. You know, I'm not saying that that's
yeah.
it's just, but I think it's just such a relief when you allow yourself the space to actually use the methods that you find personally, that you find inspiring. And you know, that's completely different for every person, and I think that's so beautiful to you know, that everyone is allowed the space to have those different voices and to have those different intonations, and you know.
Definitely. If we move on to Chernobyl, which I rewatched the whole series. I watched it first time, but rewatched it over the last couple of days, and to be put back into that extraordinarily visceral, tense, so kind of tragic in the sense of people's fates are spread out into the future. You know, from the moment that they come into contact with any of the radiation, that each of the people you see on screen has got a tragic future ahead of them. But I wanted to talk about how you created the cues and the sort of soundscapes, but perhaps with relation to collaboration, and bringing us back a little bit to where we started, because in terms of perhaps working with sound recorders like Chris Watson, who again I've met, and who's an absolute a legend, because the sort of the big picture of going to record in the disused nuclear power plant that they filmed in afterwards. It's the sort of thing that it's a great idea to have, but it's not always possible to pull off that well, I think. And you seem to have around you a team of long-term collaborators, because you must have known Chris from Touch way back, and then working with Francesco and Sam, I guess, as well. And you know, the sort of could you tell us how, sort of almost practically, what that process was like to go and listen and record and then make music from the sounds?
Yeah. So it was really clear that, you know, Chernobyl, you know, I was working on both of them at the same time. So I spent quite a bit of time like thinking about like what was different between these worlds, and Chernobyl, of course, is an event that affected so many people that are still very much alive today, and it's such an important, like I think one of the more important like historical events of our like later history, and it had just such a huge impact on so many people that we you know, that we all know, you know, people that in Germany, for example, weren't allowed to eat mushrooms because of, you know, the effects of the aftermath of the explosion and all of this. You know, there's so many deep layers of effect that it had on people. So I thought it was really, and obviously not to mention the people that lost their lives or got sick, or you know, the family members that are still alive today that were present, and so on and so forth. You know, I thought it was really important to be as honest as possible about what happened there, and to not like over dramatize like what happened, and not sort of like sensationalize it. And you know, so I just thought that that it was really important that the space itself got a real place and a real voice, like in the story, and that the space had to be like real, and that the radiation, which of course is like one of the biggest characters in this story, that the radiation also had like a voice, because radiation of course is like, we can't see it and we can't film it and we can't capture it, but we can somehow feel it and we can sense it. And I felt that the radiation really needed to be real and it needed to be present. And so it seemed like very obvious that to just go there and to understand also myself a bit better, like what radiation feels like and what it is, and you know, to be able to form any sort of opinion for myself about what it is. You know, I had to kind of experience it. So I went there with Chris and Sam to just basically listen to the space and just try to understand the space through sound and experience it. And so we recorded like hours and hours of this power plant, not knowing at all if this was going to be material that we could use.
Is this a bad idea? Probably.
Yeah, exactly. We were just like, you know, this seems like a great idea, possibly, but it might be terrible. You might come out totally empty-handed. So we just, you know, we just went in there with open ears and just like, you know, our curiosity just like, you know, channeled to the max, and we're just like, okay, what's gonna happen? And we just, it's so wonderful again when you to be able to have a dialogue about something like this, like with a person, for example, like Chris Watson, who just, he has such a deep listening practice on and I hope everyone in this Zoom knows who Chris Watson is, and if you don't, I recommend checking him out, because it's like he has a deep listening practice on a level that's just like so elevating and inspiring, and to just being able to kind of experience sound with him and just like how it excites him, and it's just like it's enough to fire up the whole, you know, the whole power plant. You know, he could do it himself, just on his enthusiasm. Wow. It's just I think he's a marvelous person to have a dialogue about sound. It was like a wonderful experience to go there and listen to his power plant through his ears and with his ears and his microphones, and we just got so much amazing material from there. So we managed to create the whole score out of these recordings entirely. So and that process basically, I mean, it was again like it was a very long and drawn out process, because it required a lot of patience, and it required like a lot of listening and like detailed listening and trial and error and you know, but it was I felt that this process and this story, it really needed that attention to the actual facts, to the actual details of how this space sounds like and how radiation sounds like, and so I like took these recordings and then just listened in extreme detail to all of them, to every single second, and then, you know, picked up snippets of the here and there which were possible musical material, and then like stripped them, you know, moved them in the frequency spectrum to places that could be like, you know, worked with, and you know, so there were like some like snippets that were completely like inaudible that I stressed out.
Yeah.
So it was like it was like as far away from the Joker process as possible. Like, you know, it was completely like microscopic.
Yes. I recognize that door squeak. That's door 17B from the third floor.
Exactly.
But did you? So if we take as a for instance, because it sounds like you enjoy very much these long periods of exploration, but then there comes the day of reckoning where episode 2 needs locking and it needs to all be sort of sent to the dub. If we look, for instance, at the cue that we just picked out, which again is as another sort of sensational piece of drama, it's not so much that necessarily this sort of virtuoso scoring with a massive orchestra hopping up and down. It feels so much more integrated, and the lines between what are sound design elements, what are musical elements, what are musical sound design elements, all are very fluid. But if you took a scene like that, would you be starting with effectively just that 2-3 minute sequence, and would you then start to play sounds to fit, or were you taking a cue that you'd written before, putting the cue on and then shaping it? What was your sort of in the weeds process, cue by cue?
So I mean, it took a really long time for Chernobyl to find the right way of using the sound, or like to use the right way into the music. Took a really long time, because it took a lot of experimenting with this material before we actually came to a conclusion, or where we came to a place where we actually really worked for everyone involved. Because again, the big difference between Chernobyl and Joker, for example, was Joker is very much it's like one man's vision, basically. It's like
director led. Always the same with telly.
Exactly. Yeah. No, Joker was very much like Todd's vision, and he was like the person that led us through this vision. But Chernobyl was a bit more of a collaborative process. Like there were more people involved in the the producers had a strong voice, the writer had a strong voice, the director had a strong voice. So and then and I obviously have my ideas as well.
That's right. Yes.
But, so it really took episode 1 took months to just kind of get to a conclusion of, and but I think it was really, really worth it. So it took a lot of just trial and error, trying out different things and trying out different sounds and different tempos and different aesthetics and stuff like that. So but once that was kind of established, okay, this is that direction that works for everyone, then it was kind of possible to create a bigger library of those types of songs, and then you could go for more create kind of ground cues or ground pieces that you could then place and put up and stuff to actually edit with.
That's it.
Yeah.
I think that difference, which isn't not every younger composer is necessarily familiar with, in terms of the decision making and the number of opinions that you might have on a project, and there's a sense of I think TV in my experience has a sort of a particular going for the wrong decision maker, trying to please the wrong person in telly is a very bad mistake. Because there are those layers above, often who you need to bring along with your ideas. Have you found over the projects that you've done that you have developed any sort of political strategies, or do you just try and stay just open and communicative, or do you let other people do that and do the late night phone calls?
No, I definitely prefer doing them myself, because I'm very much I'm a very much a hands-on person. I don't have a big team of people that are doing doing my work. You know, I don't even have a manager. I basically still do everything myself. I'm still trying to wear all those hats that I was speaking about.
That's right. Get yourself a nice manager. Never have to work again.
Exactly.
Oh,
yeah. No. So I have all those conversations myself, but I think, you know, it's you know, that's kind of the complicated and the interesting thing about working within this medium, like with working with film and television, is that the productions are so big, you know, or I mean, it can be, there's have to be, but it is always, like, no matter the scope even of the production, like it's always such a big dialogue that you're having, and you're having often, like, you know, a big dialogue in the sense of, like, you know, over an extended time, or also like with a lot of people, and a lot of people with sometimes like very different ideas. And the music is, of course, like the element that you can change the most, like in the least amount of time latest in the process. So this dialogue can easily become like very heated in the, you know, in the last stages, and, you know, there's a lot of things that can change very fast in those last
how do you do did you find yourself getting unsettled on either of those projects? Do you have, I'm smoothly segueing into some questions, because there've been some wonderful questions on YouTube and on the Zoom chat. And there's from John Kudunis from Australia, says, have you developed any daily rituals to get you into that fluid state mentally and physically? And I think that the subject broadly of mental health and dealing particularly with those pinch points that you describe, because it does get a bit tasty sometimes.
Yes. No, I mean, this is exactly it. Like, this is where it really, where it is like vital to be feeling good yourself for those pinch points. Oh, yeah. Because you also have to be very careful not to be, because, like I said, like, you know, these last minute conversations can easily become very heated, and it's very important to not, like, react too fast or too strongly to situations like that, and to be able to distance yourself from like, you know, snappy reactions. Like, you have to be able to kind of create a gap between response and stimuli, you know, and
totally.
So yes, I do have a pretty strong both yoga and meditation process, which I think has definitely been key.
Sometimes the only thing that keeps any of us together, isn't it? Really, it's just like, oh, like...
Exactly. I think, you know, yoga is just it's such a magical tool of accessing, you know, just to creating fluidity in your joints, and creating fluidity in your thoughts, and you know, extending this gap between response and stimuli, and meditation being a part of that praxis is also, like, I found to be like very, 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 very valuable in that whole process. And I think, like, also the more you can bring it into just like the being like a part of your creative process, and when you start to recognize how valuable it is, both with your inner dialogue and your dialogue with other people, then the more you kind of you can basically take it into the whole equation.
I totally agree, and that reminds me to start meditating again, because I stopped when we had our last baby, and I'm broken now. It's all gone. It's all gone. My head's not in the right place. Again, so many beautiful questions. I'm going to sort of like stick a couple of them together here. This is from Catherine on YouTube, and she just says, "Are there any?" Her question was about female composer support groups and companies that you recommend. But I just wanted to blend that in with a remark I heard you make on another interview, I think, which was about describing the time at the moment as a big awakening, and that whether in terms of just, I think when you probably made that remark, it would have definitely been pre-COVID and would have been pre-Black Lives Matter, and I think
what being an awakening? I missed that.
It was just a phrase that you used where you described the sort of the change in after the Me Too movement,
Yes, Me Too, yeah.
as a big awakening, and it and without sort of wanting to kind of count numbers or sort of go back and go who first won what when. I was just interested in your experiences as a woman composer right now.
Yeah, exactly. No, I felt a huge difference because like I've been working as a musician for a lot of years.
Never count.
Let's just say like a lot of years.
Yeah.
I've been
a few
working with within film and TV for like over a decade, and I think to a lot of people it might seem like I just came out of nowhere, but like that's because like all of a sudden I became very visible, and that's also like very surprising for myself.
Yeah.
But because as a person that's just been like I've just been kind of staying with my practice for I guess like almost 20 years. I've just been like going my route like very slowly but very steadily, and that the same goes for film and TV. And I think like the general vibe that I came across like as a female film composer, even just like as a female composer, it was I often came from a place of people just being like very surprised that I was writing music or that I wrote this music myself. That was like a comment that I would get a lot. It was like, and you just wrote this yourself, which is something that
that it was too heavy for you to pick up. Maybe it was just.
And what is like you just wrote this? It's something that I'm expecting, like a guy would never probably hear.
Yeah. Oh.
So it was like just like little remarks like that always kind of felt very bizarre and were kind of just of its time, I think. And then as in the last, I'd say maybe like 4 years or so, it's gone from people being kind of unsure of whether they should trust a female for the job, and being kind of more just like excited and welcoming about a female person being able to write music. all the discussion that came around Me Too, and just like but again, like it's not that I was like I wasn't sexually harassed or anything like that. Like I wasn't like like I didn't experience anything directly related to Me Too, but just as the discussion that happened around it, and just like the discussion of the lack of presence of women in the industry in general, I think just made a lot of people realize, like, wait a minute, there's 1% women composers in the universe, like writing this, music to these thousands of films that are being produced, and it's just like when you start seeing these statistics, you just it just makes you kind of wake up a little bit, and you just start to realize, like, wait a minute, that is very odd, and that should not be like that, because I think in an industry where which is all about storytelling, and it's all about telling every story under the sun. I mean, obviously, you would want to have every voice under the sun to be able to chime into the storytelling, because the more point of views you have on storytelling, the more, you know, exciting it is, and the more rich it is, and the more, you know, we get to experience. And so obviously we should, you know, welcome that. You know, people are just like, they're tired, and they want to have a place and a voice and yeah, a place for their voice to be heard, you know, in society. And I think that's just something that should just be celebrated. And I hope it is, and I hope it will be.
Definitely. Bravo. I'm going to join a few more questions together and ask you about life in Berlin. So obviously Iceland was originally home, but you've settled in Berlin and been there for how many years now? For quite a few.
Quite a few. I think it's been something like 17 years or something. I mean, not that anyone's counting, but something like that.
That's it. And there's been a couple of questions asking about Johan, and the obviously it's greatly missed, and in a way maybe sort of frame those questions about what it was like to work with him in the wider context of what it was like and what it is like to be part of a musical community in Berlin itself. I mean, we know some of the same wonderful people and worked in some of those places, and it feels like there's a collaborative spirit with not just some of the composers like Dustin O'Halloran when he was there, or Johan that people might be more familiar with, but a whole wonderful community in Berlin. Maybe I'm painting a rose-tinted picture. Maybe everybody hates each other. She's like, get out, Francesco.
No, definitely not. No, I think yeah, I mean, it stems very much from the same place. I mean, as I talked about in the beginning, you know, like Johan and I, obviously we met each other in Iceland in the 90s, and so we are very much like, you know, the part of the same, we're very much a part of the same group of friends and group of musicians that were just experimenting and collaborating and having a dialogue and hanging out, and so we were we started collaborating like in the 90s, just through that group of people, and then in 2003 we started like our first like duo collaboration. Like we just like had a recording session in his kitchen where we were like, you know, trying out ideas, and we basically just never stopped. We really kind of, you know, in each other found our musical soulmates, you know, and so we just continued collaborating since that kitchen recording in 2003 until the very last day. And it's very, you know, very all those people you mentioned, like Dustin and Francesco and like all of those people are you know, also a part of that dialogue. So I moved to Berlin in 2003 as well, and so I met Dustin and Francesco here, and Johan he moved to Copenhagen and then came to Berlin. I forget what year it was. Maybe, well, it was 2000 or something. 2000. I don't know, 10, 11. I was counting that either. But it was so we were so I was in a studio complex, and he joined that complex as well. It was Dustin was there, and some other mutual friends, and we just had this kind of lovely, and still have this lovely community of people just like-minded people, you know, people that you can have the what do you call it before, like the water cooler conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
It's just it's so beautiful to be able to have a dialogue with people, especially when you're working as a composer. You know, that tends to be like a very lonely job, and it's just so great to be able to have a dialogue with people that understand the process you're going through and understand, like, you know, your ideas and your dialogue heartaches and
Yes, mostly the heartaches.
yeah.
We've had a question. We're sadly, very sadly, coming sort of reasonably close to the end of our time together, which is for me a personal shame, because I think many of your ideas that you embody about flow and improvisation and collaboration are really important, and I think your extraordinary and well-deserved success, one of the byproducts of that is that these ideas, which I think are crucial and a great antidote to some of the sort of kind of harsher ways of living in film composing, necessarily get more attention, which is something that I'm very grateful for you for being so brilliant and making them sort of letting these ideas have the attention that they have. But the final questions will be the traditional sort of career advice questions, which I always find confusing, because it's sort of like, what would you say to somebody who was just starting out? But if you're just starting out, it's such a vulnerable time. It's so sort of trying to find, there was several questions about finding your own voice, because I think you embodied that beautifully. But there's a question here from Sophie Lloyd, just the second part of the question, which said, if you could tell your younger self one thing about female composers, what would it be? Or just to broaden that out, if you could just tell your younger self anything useful that you've learned, how might that look?
Well, I think in regards to you know, people who are starting out and you know, finding their voices and those kind of general career questions, I think it's really, really, really crucial. It's really important, and that's the most important thing, and that's something that I would definitely kind of pound into my younger self, is that it's so important to listen, to listening is so crucial. And that goes for like listening to just like have, you know, when you're having a conversation with someone, when you're having a dialogue with someone, you know, that you're collaborating with, and also just like listening to yourself and truly listening to yourself and truly respecting what it is that you're hearing, and not like, you know, not listening to what it is that you think you should be doing or what's cool at the moment, or it's like the right process at the moment, because it's like I was saying before, like I think most people, you know, there's so many preconceived ideas about how you're supposed to do music, but like music is such a, it's just a form of expression, and I think there shouldn't be a right way of expressing yourself. Like there shouldn't be as long as you're not hurting anyone with what you're saying, and as long as you're not hurting anyone with your action, there shouldn't be any restrictions on how you express yourself. And I think the way that you express yourself in music is best suited in the way that really resonates with you personally. And I think it takes a lot of time and practice to be able to hear anything like even in that direction, like, and you have to kind of just really stick with that practice, and you have to kind of stick with just showing up and showing up again and showing up again. And this is, like I said, I mean, I've been doing music professionally like for 20 years, and it's only first now that, you know, I'm getting any like real recognition, and that's really never even been my kind of aim or goal or point of doing it, but it took a really long time for me just like showing up to be able to hear myself. And I think that just needs, and therefore for anyone else to hear me. And I think today it's just like the music industry is a very confusing place at the moment, because no one's buying records anymore. We can't have concerts anymore. It's just like a very confusing time in music history, and I think it's more important than ever that people just listen and honor their own voice and their own process. And I think the stronger connected you are to your own voice and your own identity and your own process and your own state of flow, which is always going to be different from everyone else's. No one has the same voice. Like, every voice is different, and that's just something that should be not only respected and heard, but also celebrated. And I think that's something that I think it's important for people to stand by and to be patient with as well, because that you're not going to hear it like instantly. It takes like real showing up and real patience. You might not hear shit for the longest time. But it's like, I think it's worth the chance. That would be
worth the wait. Worth the wait. Well, I think that's an absolutely wonderful, beautiful, and rather moving place to end. Hildur, thanks so much for taking some time out to chat to everybody. Thank you to everybody who's joined us on the chat room, whether on Zoom or on YouTube. I believe that the session will be available on YouTube to watch afterwards if you want to catch up on some of the things that Hildur's mentioned. And if you want to reach out to either of us on social media on the usual ways, particularly if there's any if there are any names that perhaps that we use that we didn't explain, or any other information, then I certainly volunteer to be findable, and I volunteer Hildur not to to have some time off and have a break. But thank you very, very much indeed. Thanks to everybody. We're going to wind up here and say goodbye to everyone. I'm hoping one of our hosts from BAFTA will pull the plug. And thanks very much to BAFTA for hosting this, because I think it's wonderful to have had such a wide-ranging and very, I think, fruitful and warm chat. So thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks. Oh, it's the Zoom wave. This is how you have to finish your phone call. 2 hands with a little dance. Da, 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 da.
The jazz hands.
Hopefully it'll stop then.